Hi, I'm Tim Carter from AskTheBuilder.com, and I want to show you how easy it is to use some amazing epoxy products to not only patch cracks in concrete, but to fill up depressions and surface defects. You can also use this epoxy compound to help anchor bolts inside of holes that you might drill in concrete. Okay, the first thing I want to show you is this amazing epoxy that fits into a regular caulking gun, and it's got a special nozzle on it. This nozzle screws on. We're going to have to cut the tip off in just a minute. But inside this nozzle is a special, I don't know what to call it, but it's just it's like a maze that maybe a rat would go through if it could fit in there. And this mixes the two parts of epoxy that are inside this caulking tube, so that once the epoxy comes out the end of the nozzle, it's already mixed, ready to go. And this particular epoxy has got some grit in it, you know, to help strengthen it and to make it a really good product. We're going to fill a crack in a concrete slab that I poured just for this video series. Okay, we're ready to caulk the crack in the concrete, and I've got the epoxy all the way down to the tip, and it's a special caulk gun, by the way. It's one that's probably about $20 because it's got really good control here, because it takes a lot of squeezes to make the plunger go in, which is a good thing. That gives you a lot more control. So you want to be really careful when you apply the epoxy, and you want the epoxy not to come up too high. So let's get started. Okay, I'm ready to caulk, and you can see this nice crack in the concrete. And the key is to let the caulk come down out of the tube, and it oozes in. And it's oozing into that crack, which is just right. You can see it go in. And holding the tip kind of vertically really helps you with your control, and you're trying to make sure that you don't get a lot of excess out onto the edge of the crack. All right. Now we're going to tool this just a little bit, and I'll show you the magic trick how to disguise it, even though the color doesn't look so bad right now. I've got this little concrete pointing trowel that's got a nice tip on it, and I'm going to use that to try to tool this epoxy. Now, you've only got a few minutes to work with it, generally about 20 minutes, but if I were you, I'd get the tooling done within 5 minutes or less. Let's get started. Okay, you can see that the epoxy is up a little higher than the concrete slab, so I'm just going to try to push it over here, down a little bit into that crack, maybe force it down into the crack a little bit more, by pushing the tip of the trowel down into the hole, into the crack. That's working really well there. And you might have to bring some other over in case you didn't fill the crack all the way. And you can also do this. You can kind of take the trowel. That's looking pretty good. Okay. One of the tricks to make your crack repair look really good is to use some sand that matches the texture of the top of your concrete. This is a brand new slab. It's very uniform in color, but your concrete may have a different color, and you actually may see the grains of sand. So you want to use some sand that has all different types of different sizes, and then you scatter that into the fresh epoxy. Okay, can you believe how simple that is? Right now there's excess sand that's on top of the epoxy. That's okay. You just leave it alone. Don't try to brush it away. The epoxy will harden up and get pretty stiff in about 20 minutes, depending on the air temperature. So just follow the instructions on the label of the epoxy. But the point is, just leave it alone, and magic's going to happen. Once it's hard, you can brush it off, and the joint is going to look fantastic. I'm serious. Okay, now the next step is to show how to use this epoxy to fill bigger holes and surface depressions on concrete slabs. If you need to fill a bigger hole in a concrete slab, or maybe a surface imperfection, you probably want to use the epoxy product that, you know, is two parts, you know, the A and the B, and it comes in different size containers. And this is a really good way to do it. You just have to mix equal parts of the material and blend them together until they are a uniform color. And then you just start to add it into the imperfection or the hole. If it's a really deep hole, you don't want to use more than 1.5 inches at a time or so, maybe 2 inches. Let that get hard, then mix up some more until you get to the top of the hole. Okay, I'm getting ready to add the B component. Now here, you got to use a different stick if you're not going to use all the material up. If I was to put the stick that had the A component in here, I would mix the two together as I put it in, and any of that material that you left behind, it would get hard in the container. Realize that if you don't use all of this epoxy up, it's going to stay inside the container. Air doesn't really hurt it as long as you don't mix the two together. Once you mix the two components together, you start an irreversible chemical reaction, and it gets really, really hard. Okay, I've got it mixed up really, really well. It's uniform in color, it's a uniform gray, and I made sure I scraped along the bottom of the piece of wood to get any of that initial white part A epoxy mixed in with the B, so we're ready to go. And you can see the consistency of it. You know, it's very, very, very sticky. It's so sticky that it'll not only stick, obviously, to flat surfaces, but if you're trying to fill a vertical crack or even a small imperfection overhead, it'll stick to that. It'll actually stick overhead. So let's get to work. Okay, right here I've got a surface imperfection, you know, where maybe the top part of the concrete has spalled off. It's probably only about, you know, maybe 3/8 of an inch deep at the deepest part. So you just take the epoxy and you just put it in there, making sure that the concrete is dry and making sure that there's no dust inside, you know, the concrete. And boy, is it sticky, let me tell you. Okay, now it's a lot higher than the concrete, you know, here, so you need to scrape off the excess. You can use the pointing trowel like I have here for that job as well if you want. You got to work fast, remember. You've only got so much time before it gets really hard to work with. Yeah, it's really simple to get this off and make it look nice and smooth. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now the same trick applies here. It's probably a good idea to go ahead and put some of the sand into the fresh epoxy so that you match the texture. Try to use sand that's the same size and color as the sand that you see in your concrete. Okay, I want to show you how to use the caulk gun and the epoxy to fill a vertical crack. It's like falling off a log. It's so simple. It's really caveman simple. You just squirt the epoxy into the crack and it doesn't droop or sag and you're all done. It's really, really simple. Now I want to show you how to use the epoxy to help anchor bolts that you might want to put into a concrete slab. It's very simple. All you do is use a rotohammer drill a hole into the concrete, make sure you get all of the dust out of the hole, and then squirt the epoxy into the hole, making sure you don't fill it all the way to the top because the bolt is going to take up some of the room. And then rotate the bolt as you insert it into the epoxy to make sure it gets covered very well. It's that easy. All right, it's really that simple to basically patch a crack, to fill an imperfection in concrete. Can you imagine how easy it would be for you to do what I just did? There's nothing to it. It's simple to do, and this epoxy is very, very strong. It'll get very hard in just about 20 or 30 minutes, and over 24 hours, it's extremely strong. In fact, it's stronger than the concrete itself. And if you do everything right, it's going to be a lasting repair for a very, very long time. I'm Tim Carter for AskTheBuilder.com. If you want to discover more home improvement tips, go to AskTheBuilder.com.